It was early morning, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than silence. The alarm had been ringing for minutes before she reached out and turned it off. She didn't want to get up. The world outside her window looked gray, like her thoughts. For the past few months, mornings had all felt the same, slow, empty, and heavy. She used to love mornings. She used to make coffee, play her favorite songs, and open the curtains wide, but now the curtains stayed closed. The coffee went cold before she even took a sip. It was as if life had lost all its color. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, feeling the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her chest. Her phone buzzed. A message from work reminding her about a meeting she was supposed to attend. She didn't even bother replying. She was already running late. Again. Her apartment was small, a quiet space filled with old memories. On the wall hung a picture from better times, her smile bright, eyes full of life. It almost didn't feel like her anymore. That woman in the photo looked brave. She looked free. The woman sitting here now felt like a stranger. She dragged herself to the bathroom, splashing water on her face, hoping it would wash away the emptiness. The mirror showed tired eyes and pale skin. She whispered softly, "You can do this," but even her own voice sounded uncertain. When she finally reached work, no one seemed to notice how fragile she felt. She forced a smile, nodded through conversations, and tried to look busy. But inside, she felt like she was standing on thin ice, pretending everything was fine, terrified it could all crack at any moment. The truth was, she had been living in pain for a long time. Not the kind you can see, but the kind that hides deep inside, the kind that slowly eats away at your joy. The world around her moved fast, people chasing dreams, posting happy pictures, celebrating small wins. But she felt stuck, lost somewhere between who she used to be and who she was now. There was a time when she had big dreams. She wanted to travel, to write, to do something meaningful. She used to believe she could change her life. But over the years, disappointment piled up. Broken promises, failed relationships, dreams that never came true. Each one left a small crack in her heart until one day, she stopped trying to fix it. At night, when the noise of the day faded, her thoughts became louder. Regret, guilt, loneliness. They all sat beside her like unwanted guests. Some nights she cried quietly, pressing her face into the pillow so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Other nights she just stared at the ceiling, numb and empty, wondering if life would ever feel normal again. Her friends had tried to help once, but she started pulling away. She didn't want to explain why she felt this way. She didn't want to see pity in their eyes. So she stopped answering messages, stopped going out, and started living in silence. There was one person who used to check on her, a coworker who noticed her absence, her quietness. They would sometimes invite her for coffee or ask how she was really doing. But each time she brushed it off with the same lie. "I'm fine." 2 words that felt easier than explaining the truth, but she wasn't fine. Not even close. One evening, after another long day of pretending to be okay, she came home, dropped her bag by the door, and sat on the floor. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of a streetlight outside her window. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't move. She just sat there, staring into nothing. She thought about how much had changed, how much she had lost. She thought about the people who once promised to stay but didn't, about the version of herself that used to laugh freely, love deeply, and believe that life had meaning. She missed that person more than anything. Her mind started replaying old moments, conversations that ended badly, choices she wished she could undo, moments when she should have walked away but didn't. The pain was like a wave, coming in slow and strong until it pulled her under. She whispered to herself, "What's the point anymore?" Those words echoed in the room like a confession. She felt guilty for thinking them, but also too tired to push them away. It wasn't that she wanted to disappear. It was that she didn't know how to live anymore. That night she lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the window. The sound was soft, almost comforting, but her thoughts were loud. She kept asking herself, when did I lose myself? When did life become this hard? Days turned into weeks. Each one felt heavier than the last. She started missing more work, ignoring phone calls and skipping meals. The world outside kept moving, but she stood still, trapped in her own silence. Then one morning, she found herself sitting on the floor again, back against the wall, holding an old journal she hadn't opened in years. It was filled with pages of hope, dreams, goals, little quotes she used to write when she needed courage. One page caught her attention. In her own handwriting, it said, "Even when it hurts, don't give up. You're still here for a reason." She read that line over and over. For a moment, something inside her stirred. A tiny flicker of strength she thought she had lost. She didn't know what that reason was anymore, but maybe, just maybe, there was still something left worth fighting for. The next day, she forced herself to go outside. The air was cool, the sun faint but warm. She took a walk through the park near her apartment, a place she hadn't visited in months. Children were playing, people were laughing, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe the world wasn't as cold as she thought. She sat on a bench, watching life move around her. A little girl ran past, holding her mother's hand, laughing so freely that it made her smile without realizing it. It was such a small thing, but it felt big, like a reminder that happiness still existed somewhere, even if it wasn't hers yet. That evening, she came home and opened her window. She let the sunlight in. It wasn't much, but it was a start. But life has a way of testing people just when they start to hope again. A few days later, she started feeling unwell, constant fatigue, nausea, dizziness. At first, she thought it was stress or lack of sleep. She ignored it, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. Weeks went by and her body felt different. Something inside her was changing and she couldn't explain it. One night, after feeling sick again, she sat in the bathroom holding a small test in her shaking hands. The little screen showed 2 pink lines. She stared at it, unable to breathe. Her heart raced. Her mind went blank. She sat there for what felt like hours, tears running down her face, not sure if they were from fear, shock, or both. She wasn't ready for this, not now, not like this. The next morning, she woke up hoping it had all been a dream. But it wasn't. The test was still there on the counter, staring back at her like a truth she couldn't escape. She sank to the floor again, holding her knees, whispering to herself, "What am I going to do?" The news felt heavy. Too heavy for someone already breaking. Her life was already in pieces. She didn't know how to take care of herself, let alone another life. She felt trapped, terrified, and completely alone. That night, she lay in bed, her hands resting gently on her stomach, her thoughts racing. She couldn't stop crying. But beneath all the fear, there was something else, something she couldn't name yet. A quiet feeling she didn't understand. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something close. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about giving up. She was thinking about what it meant to protect something, someone. Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady against the window. She listened to it, closing her eyes, and whispered through her tears, "Please, help me get through this." She didn't know it yet, but that small life growing inside her would soon become the very thing that pulled her back from the edge. The beginning of a story she never expected, and the reason she would one day find her purpose again. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the test again. The small piece of plastic that had completely changed her world still sat on the dresser, as if mocking her confusion. It was strange how something so tiny could hold such big news. 2 faint pink lines that carried both fear and life. Her hands trembled as she tried to take a deep breath. She'd cried the night before until her eyes were swollen, and even now her mind couldn't catch up with what was happening. The thought of having a baby felt too big, too heavy. She wasn't ready, not now, not when she could barely take care of herself. She had no one to call. The father, someone she had once trusted, had already drifted out of her life long before this moment. Their relationship had been fragile from the start, more comfort than love, more loneliness than connection. She knew deep down that he wasn't coming back. The next morning, she forced herself to make an appointment at a small clinic across town. Her heart pounded as she walked through the glass doors, the smell of disinfectant filling her nose. She sat in the waiting room, surrounded by strangers, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't control. When the nurse finally called her name, she followed her into a small room with soft-colored walls. The nurse spoke gently, explaining the routine tests, but her words faded into the background. Everything felt distant, like she was watching someone else's life play out. Minutes later, the nurse smiled softly and said, "You're about 6 weeks along." 6 weeks. The words hit her like a wave. It was real now, no more guessing, no more maybe. There was a tiny life growing inside her. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just nodded, holding back tears. The nurse noticed her silence and sat down beside her. "I know this must feel overwhelming," she said kindly. "But you're not alone. You can take your time to decide what's best for you." She nodded again, unable to form words. Her throat felt tight. On the way home, the city around her looked different. The noise, the lights, the faces, it all felt too loud, too fast. She just wanted to disappear. When she reached home, she sat on her bed and stared at the wall. She kept thinking about what the nurse said, "You're not alone." But that wasn't true. She had never felt more alone in her life. Days passed in silence. She barely ate, barely slept. Her thoughts were a mix of fear and confusion. She thought about her future, how she would raise a child with no partner, no savings, no plan. The fear was suffocating. There were moments when she even thought maybe she shouldn't keep it. She didn't say it out loud, but the thought lingered, heavy and painful. But then one afternoon, she found herself standing in the baby section of a small store near her apartment. She didn't know why she went there. Maybe curiosity, maybe something else. She picked up a tiny pair of socks, soft, white, smaller than her palm. Her eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over the fabric. Something inside her shifted. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about her pain. She was thinking about someone else. Someone who hadn't even arrived yet. That night, she lay in bed with her hands gently resting on her stomach. It was still too early to feel anything, but the thought that there was a heartbeat inside her made her chest ache in a way she couldn't describe. It wasn't fear this time, it was something softer. Something like hope. She whispered quietly, "I don't know how to do this, but I'll try." Weeks turned into months. Each day was different. Some days she felt strong, ready to face whatever came next. Other days she broke down crying, convinced she wasn't good enough to be a mother. But slowly she started taking small steps. She began eating better, going for walks, reading about pregnancy. She even bought a small notebook and started writing letters to her unborn child. At first they were short, just a few words. But soon the pages filled with her hopes, her fears and her promises. "Dear little one," she wrote one night, "I don't know who you'll be yet, but I hope you'll forgive me for not being perfect. You've already given me a reason to keep going." There was something healing about writing those words. For the first time in a long while, she felt connected to herself, to the tiny life growing inside her, to something bigger than the pain she had carried. Her doctor's appointments became small milestones. Each time she heard the heartbeat, a sound like soft drums echoing through the room, she felt tears in her eyes. That sound reminded her that she wasn't as broken as she thought. Something inside her was strong, alive, growing. One day after a checkup, she sat on a bench outside the clinic holding the ultrasound photo. It was just a blurry image, shades of gray, but to her it was everything. For the first time in years, she smiled without forcing it. Her nurse, the same one who had been kind to her that first day, often talked to her about taking care of herself. She encouraged her to attend a small support group for expecting mothers. At first, she hesitated. The idea of sitting in a room full of strangers and sharing her story terrified her. But eventually, she decided to try. The group met every Thursday afternoon in a small community center. The first time she walked in, she almost turned back. But then she saw the other women, different ages, different stories, but all carrying the same mixture of fear and love. She sat quietly at first, listening. Some talked about their worries, some about their excitement. One woman said something that stuck with her. "Sometimes the hardest things in life turn out to be our biggest blessings." That night, those words kept replaying in her mind. She didn't know if she believed them yet, but she wanted to. As her belly began to grow, she started to notice how people treated her differently. Strangers smiled at her on the street. A cashier offered to carry her bags. Small gestures, but they warmed her heart. It was as if the world was slowly opening up again, showing her kindness she had forgotten existed. Still, there were hard days. Days when loneliness crept back in, whispering that she wasn't ready, that she would fail. But every time she placed her hand on her stomach and felt that faint flutter, she remembered she wasn't alone anymore. One night, sitting by the window, she watched the city lights flicker in the distance. She thought about the person she used to be, the one who had almost given up, who thought her story was over. And then she thought about the tiny heartbeat inside her, growing stronger each day. Maybe this was what second chances looked like. Not grand miracles, but small moments that slowly rebuild a life. She started taking evening walks, talking softly to her baby as she walked. "I hope you'll have my strength," she would whisper. "But I also hope you'll laugh more than I did. I promise I'll try to give you the life I never had." The months continued to pass, and with each one she felt a little more like herself again. Not the old version of herself, but a new one, stronger, quieter, but braver too. When she went for her next ultrasound, the nurse turned the screen toward her. "Would you like to hear the heartbeat again?" she asked. She nodded quickly, wiping her eyes before the sound even started. Then it came, the rhythmic, steady beat. The nurse smiled. "That's a healthy little one." She couldn't stop crying. Not sad tears this time, but the kind that come when you realize that somehow, against all odds, life is still finding a way to move forward. She left the clinic holding the photo tightly against her chest, whispering softly, "You're my reason now." On the bus ride home, she looked out the window at the passing city, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't that her life was perfect. She still had fears, still faced long days and restless nights. But she had a purpose now, a reason to wake up. That night, she wrote one last line in her notebook before going to bed. "Maybe I didn't save you. Maybe you came to save me." As she drifted to sleep, she placed her hands on her stomach and smiled. The world outside was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The months went by slowly, each one filled with new changes that she never imagined she would face. Her body was changing, her moods were changing, and her heart was learning to adjust to something it had never known before: unconditional love mixed with fear. There were days she woke up smiling, feeling her baby move for the first time. The gentle kicks felt like tiny reminders that life was still growing inside her, that she wasn't alone anymore. And then there were days when she woke up crying, scared of what the future might hold. The thought of being responsible for another life terrified her. She still lived alone in her small apartment, but it didn't feel as empty as before. She had cleared out one corner of her bedroom and turned it into a small nursery. It wasn't much, just a used crib she found online, a few soft blankets, and a mobile that played soft music. Every time she looked at that little space, it gave her a strange kind of peace. Money was tight. She worked as much as she could, but her energy wasn't the same. Some days she came home exhausted, her back aching, her feet swollen, her mind filled with worry. She didn't have family nearby, and the father of her child still hadn't called. She stopped expecting him to. She had learned to stop expecting much from people. Still, there was kindness in small places. Her neighbor, an older woman who lived down the hall, often knocked on her door with homemade soup or groceries. "You have to keep your strength up," she would say with a gentle smile. Those moments reminded her that good people still existed, even in the quiet corners of life. She also started going to a small prenatal class every Wednesday. At first, she felt out of place, sitting among couples who shared excited glances and talked about baby names. She felt invisible, sitting alone, her hands resting protectively on her belly. But one day, a woman sitting next to her smiled and said, "You're doing great. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Those words stayed with her. It's not easy, but it's worth it. She began to notice that people didn't need to fix her life to make a difference. They just needed to show kindness. As her pregnancy moved into the later months, she started seeing a counselor at the clinic. The nurse who had been so kind to her suggested it might help. The first few sessions were awkward. She didn't know what to say. But eventually she began to open up about her fears, her loneliness, her regrets. One afternoon, as she sat in the quiet room with her counselor, she said softly, "Sometimes I'm scared I'll be like my mother. She gave up when life got hard. What if I do the same?" Her counselor looked at her kindly and replied, "The fact that you're here, that you're talking about it, that you're trying, that already makes you different." She carried those words with her like a small light in her pocket. Life didn't magically get easier, but it began to feel different. The more she talked, the more she understood herself. The pain she had been carrying wasn't something to hide from, it was something to heal. She started making small changes. She went for morning walks, breathing in the cool air, talking softly to her baby as she walked. She began eating better, resting more, and even allowed herself small joys. Listening to music, reading again, and painting the nursery walls a soft cream color. Each night before bed, she would write in her notebook, the same one she had started months ago. Her handwriting had become steadier, her words filled with quiet hope. "Dear little one," she wrote, "I don't know what kind of world you'll grow up in, but I promise to make it safe for you. I promise to keep trying, even when I'm scared." As her belly grew rounder, she began to feel more connected to her baby. She would talk to it, laugh when it kicked, and sometimes cry, overwhelmed by how deeply she already loved someone she hadn't even met. But not every day was peaceful. There were nights when fear came creeping back. Nights when bills piled up, when the loneliness felt unbearable, when she missed the version of herself that wasn't always tired or worried. One night, she sat on the floor surrounded by baby clothes she had bought secondhand. They were soft and tiny, folded neatly on her lap. As she held them, tears filled her eyes. "I hope I can do this right," she whispered. "I hope I don't mess it up." The baby kicked gently, almost as if to answer her. She smiled through her tears. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll figure it out together." That small moment reminded her that she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep going. As the months passed, her connection with the nurse at the clinic grew stronger. The nurse often checked in on her, asking if she was eating well, sleeping enough, and preparing for the big day. Sometimes after her appointments, they would sit and talk for a while. The nurse would share small pieces of her own life, her challenges, her fears when she became a mother for the first time. One afternoon, as they were talking, the nurse said, "You know, sometimes we think we're too broken to be mothers, but it's love that makes us whole again." She nodded quietly, feeling those words sink deep into her heart. The final months of pregnancy were harder physically. Her body ached in ways she had never known. Sleeping was difficult, walking took effort, and emotions ran high. But even on her worst days, she found herself whispering, "Just a little longer. We're almost there." She had stopped hiding her belly behind loose clothes. Now she stood a little taller, proud of the life she carried. People noticed. Strangers smiled at her in grocery stores, offered her a seat on buses, or asked how far along she was. Those small gestures warmed her heart in ways she couldn't explain. One evening, she went for a walk in the park. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink as the sun began to set. She sat on a bench, feeling her baby move gently inside her. A little boy ran past her, laughing as his father chased after him. She smiled, imagining her own child running like that someday, free, happy, full of life. In that moment, she realized something powerful. All the pain she had carried, all the heartbreak and loneliness had led her here, to this new beginning. Maybe this was her purpose all along, to bring something good out of all that hurt. When she got home, she stood in front of the mirror, her hands resting on her round belly. She looked at herself and whispered, "You're doing it. You're really doing it." That night, as rain fell softly outside, she lit a small candle and sat quietly in her room. The flickering light filled the space with warmth. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who thought she had nothing left to live for. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, a mother, strong and determined, ready to protect the tiny heart beating inside her. The journey hadn't been easy, and she knew the hardest part was still ahead, but for the first time she didn't feel afraid. She had faced her pain, survived her loneliness, and found strength she didn't know she had. One day, during her final prenatal checkup, the nurse placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "You're ready?" Tears filled her eyes as she smiled. "I think I am," she said softly. On her way home that day, she stopped at a small shop and bought a stuffed bear. It was light brown with a red ribbon around its neck. She placed it gently in the crib that night and whispered, "Welcome home, little one. I'll see you soon." That evening, she wrote one more letter in her notebook. "Dear baby, you don't know it yet, but you saved me. You gave me a reason to wake up again, to fight again, to believe again. I was lost before you, but now I know where I'm going. I don't have everything figured out, but I have you, and that's enough." As she closed the notebook and placed it on the nightstand, she smiled through quiet tears. The room was peaceful, the air filled with the sound of soft rain. She could feel her baby moving gently, and she whispered, "We're going to be okay." Outside, the world went on as usual, cars passing, lights flickering, but inside that little apartment, something beautiful was growing. A woman who once felt broken was being rebuilt, piece by piece, by the tiny life she carried. And though she didn't know it yet, the day that would change everything was just around the corner. The final weeks of her pregnancy were long and tiring. Every small task took effort. Getting out of bed, walking to the kitchen, even tying her shoes felt like a challenge. But she didn't complain much. She had learned to find small joys in quiet moments, watching the rain through the window, feeling her baby's tiny kicks, and preparing for the day she had been waiting for. Her little apartment had changed. The corner that once felt so empty now looked warm and alive. The crib was ready, the clothes folded neatly, the stuffed bear sitting on a small shelf beside a soft lamp. Everything was simple but filled with love. She would walk around the room slowly each night, making sure everything was in place. "Almost time," she would whisper with a smile, resting her hand on her belly. She spoke softly to the baby as if they already understood each other, but as the due date got closer, her anxiety grew. There were moments when she doubted herself again. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if something went wrong? The thought of giving birth alone scared her. She had no partner, no family waiting in the hospital room, but she had something stronger now: determination. One evening, she sat on the couch watching the light fade from the sky. The air outside was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. She felt calm, almost peaceful, until a sharp pain hit her lower back. She froze, unsure at first if it was real. Another pain came, stronger this time. Her heart began to race. She took a deep breath, trying to remember what the nurse had told her about contractions. She looked at the clock. They were getting closer together. It was time. Her hands shook as she grabbed her hospital bag. She called for a taxi, pacing slowly by the door, whispering to herself, "It's okay. You're ready. You're ready." When the taxi arrived, she held her belly tightly and climbed in. The city lights blurred past the window as she breathed through the pain. The driver spoke gently, telling her not to worry, that everything would be fine. His calm voice helped steady her. By the time she reached the hospital, the contractions were stronger. A nurse rushed over with a wheelchair, her voice kind and reassuring. "You're going to be just fine," she said. "You've got this." The hospital lights were bright, the air filled with quiet urgency. Nurses moved quickly, guiding her into a room. Machines beeped softly. She changed into a hospital gown, her mind spinning between fear and excitement. Hours passed slowly. The pain came and went like waves, strong, then stronger. She gripped the bed rail, breathing deeply, trying to stay calm. The nurse held her hand, telling her she was doing great. Between contractions, her thoughts wandered. She thought about the long road that had led her here, the nights she cried herself to sleep, the days she thought she couldn't go on. And now here she was, about to bring new life into the world. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from the weight of it all, the journey, the struggle, the hope that had somehow carried her to this moment. The doctor came in and checked on her progress. "You're doing really well," he said gently. "Just a little longer." The next few hours felt like forever. Every breath, every cry, every effort felt endless. She was tired, trembling, and drenched in sweat. At one point, she whispered weakly, "I can't do this." The nurse squeezed her hand firmly and said, "Yes, you can. You've come too far to give up now." Those words echoed in her heart. She thought about all the times she had said those same words to herself when life felt unbearable. "You can do this." And then, finally, the moment came. The doctor's voice was calm but focused. "Okay, one more push. You're almost there." She gathered all her strength, every ounce of it, and pushed with everything she had. For a second, everything went silent. Then a small cry filled the room. Her heart stopped for a moment, and then the tears came. Real, unstoppable tears. The sound of that tiny cry was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. It was like hearing hope for the first time. The nurse smiled and said softly, "You have a beautiful baby girl." They placed the baby on her chest, tiny and warm. She looked down, her hands trembling as she touched the baby's soft skin. The little one opened her eyes briefly, then closed them again, resting peacefully against her. She couldn't speak. She could only cry and smile at the same time. All the pain, all the fear. It suddenly made sense. The nurse whispered, "She's perfect." She nodded, still crying, whispering softly, "You're here. You're really here." She spent the next few hours in a blur of exhaustion and awe. The baby slept soundly beside her, wrapped in a soft blanket. She couldn't stop staring. The tiny fingers, the small breaths, the peaceful face, it was all so fragile, yet so strong. When the nurse came to check on her, she smiled and said, "Do you have a name for her?" She hesitated, then smiled through her tears. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." The nurse's eyes warmed. "That's a beautiful name." She looked down at the baby again and whispered, "You're my hope. You saved me." As the night went on, the hospital room grew quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of machines and the baby's gentle breathing. She lay there, tired but peaceful, her hand resting on the small bundle beside her. She thought about the months before, the loneliness, the fear, the pain that once felt endless. And now, as she looked at her daughter, she realized that everything she had gone through had led her right here. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, warming the room. A nurse came in to bring her breakfast and check on the baby. "You both look wonderful," she said kindly. After the nurse left, she picked up her notebook from her bag and opened it to a fresh page. Her hands were shaky, but she wanted to write. "Dear Hope," she wrote slowly, "you changed everything. Before you, I didn't think I had a reason to live, but now I know I was meant to find you. You were the light waiting at the end of my dark days. You didn't just come into the world, you brought me back to life." Tears fell onto the page, but she didn't stop writing. For the first time, her tears weren't from sadness, they were from gratitude. Later that day, the nurse who had helped her through labor came to say goodbye before her shift ended. She smiled and said, "You did something amazing today. You should be proud." She smiled back, holding her daughter close. "I am," she said softly. "For the first time in a long time, I really am." When it was time to leave the hospital, she felt nervous again. Stepping out into the world with her baby felt like stepping into the unknown. But as she held Hope close to her chest, she whispered, "We'll be okay." The ride home was quiet. The city looked different now. The same streets, the same buildings, but everything felt new, brighter, softer. When she reached her apartment, she carried the baby inside and laid her gently in the crib. The sunlight coming through the window fell across the tiny face, and she smiled. The room that once felt empty now held life. She sat beside the crib, her hand resting on the edge, whispering, "You're home." That night, as she sat by the window holding her baby, she looked out at the stars. The world outside was still filled with noise and chaos, but inside her small apartment, there was peace. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who had almost given up. And she thought about this new version of herself, the mother who had fought her way through fear and found purpose in love. The journey had been long and painful, but as she rocked her baby to sleep, she realized something powerful. Sometimes the things that break us are the same things that rebuild us. She kissed her baby's forehead softly and whispered, "You were worth everything." Outside, the night was calm. The world kept moving, but inside that quiet little room, a new story had begun, one filled with hope, courage, and love. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she finally believed in something she hadn't in a long time. She believed in herself. The months after bringing her baby home were both beautiful and hard. The nights were long, the crying was constant, and the exhaustion was like nothing she had ever felt before. But even in her tiredness, there was a quiet joy that never left her. Every time she looked at her baby's tiny face, she felt peace. The early mornings were the hardest. The world outside was still dark, the apartment quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge and the baby's small whimpers. She would sit by the window, rocking her little one in her arms, whispering softly, "It's okay. I'm here." Those moments, though simple, meant everything. They reminded her that she had come a long way from where she used to be. There was a time when mornings felt empty, when she didn't want to get out of bed. Now, even when she hadn't slept all night, she woke up with purpose. Her life had changed completely. There were no more quiet evenings alone with her thoughts, no more long stretches of loneliness. Her days were filled with feedings, diaper changes, and lullabies. Her home was no longer silent, it was alive with soft coos and tiny cries. It wasn't easy. There were times she felt like she was failing. When the baby cried for hours and nothing she did seemed to help, she would sit on the floor, tears in her eyes, whispering, "I'm trying, I really am." But even in those moments, she never gave up. Slowly, she learned. She learned the different cries, the hungry one, the tired one, the one that just needed a little comfort. She learned how to calm her baby with gentle humming and how to find peace in the small, quiet pauses between each day's chaos. As weeks turned into months, she began to see how much she had grown. She had become patient, stronger than she ever thought she could be. Her body was healing, her mind was clearer, and her heart was fuller. Sometimes, when the baby was asleep, she would sit beside the crib and just watch. She couldn't believe how much love she felt for this tiny person. It was a kind of love that healed things she didn't even know were still broken. She often thought back to the night she found out she was pregnant. The fear, the shock, the uncertainty. She remembered how lost she had felt and how close she came to giving up. Now, as she held her baby close, she realized that moment had been the beginning of everything beautiful. Life still had challenges. Money was tight, and she had to return to work sooner than she wanted. Leaving her baby at a small daycare for the first time broke her heart. She cried all the way to work that day, whispering, "I'll be back soon, I promise." At work, she moved slowly, her mind always drifting back home. But when she came back in the evening and saw her baby's face light up, it made everything worth it. There were also good days. Days filled with laughter, first smiles, and new sounds. The first time her baby reached out and grabbed her finger, she felt something she couldn't put into words. It was pure love. Every milestone, no matter how small, felt like a victory. The first laugh, the first word, the first steps, all reminders that they were both growing together. As time passed, she started to notice how different she felt inside. The sadness that used to sit quietly in her chest was gone. It hadn't disappeared overnight, but slowly, piece by piece, it faded away. In its place was something stronger, hope. One evening, she sat on the couch with her baby asleep on her chest. The room was filled with the soft glow of the lamp, and the air smelled faintly of baby lotion. She looked around her small apartment. The same walls that once felt like a cage now felt like home. She smiled softly and whispered, "We did it." She thought about all the nights she used to cry, wondering if life would ever get better. And now here she was, tired, busy, but happy. Truly happy. Over the next few years, she worked hard to build a better life. She found a job that gave her more time at home. She met new people through her community and began volunteering at a local support group for mothers. At first, she was shy about sharing her story, but when she finally did, people listened closely. One woman came up to her afterward, tears in her eyes, and said, "Your story gave me hope." That moment stayed with her. She realized that maybe her pain hadn't been for nothing. Maybe it was meant to help someone else. She started speaking at small gatherings, sharing how she found strength when everything felt impossible. Her voice shook the first few times, but the more she spoke, the more she healed. Telling her story wasn't about reliving her pain. It was about showing others that healing was possible. Her daughter grew quickly. She was full of energy and curiosity, always asking questions, always laughing. Sometimes she would run into her mother's arms and say, "Mommy, you're my best friend." Each time she heard that, her eyes filled with tears. She never wanted her daughter to see how broken she once was. She wanted her to grow up knowing only love, safety, and warmth. Every night before bed, they had a small routine. She would read a story, tuck her daughter in, and whisper, "You're my little miracle." One night, her daughter looked up at her and said, "Mommy, you're my miracle too." Those words hit her heart like sunshine after a storm. She smiled and kissed her forehead, whispering, "We're each other's miracles." Years went by. The little apartment that once held so much sadness was now filled with laughter and drawings on the walls. Her daughter started school, and the quiet mornings returned, but they no longer felt lonely. She had learned to enjoy the silence again, to sit by the window with a cup of coffee and think about how far she had come. She still had difficult days, moments of doubt or fear, but she handled them differently now. She faced them with strength, knowing that she had already survived worse. One afternoon, she found her old notebook tucked away in a drawer. She opened it carefully and read through the letters she had written during her pregnancy. The words were shaky, uncertain, filled with fear, but they also carried hope. As she turned the pages, she smiled through tears. She had kept every promise she wrote in those letters. At the very end of the notebook was a blank page. She picked up a pen and began to write again. "Dear Hope, you saved me in ways I can never explain. You taught me that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. Because of you, I learned to love again, to believe again, to fight again. You were the light that guided me out of darkness. And now as I watch you grow, I realize that you didn't just save my life, you gave it meaning." She closed the notebook, pressing it to her heart. The same notebook that once held her fears now held her gratitude. That night she tucked her daughter into bed and stood by the window, looking up at the stars. The sky was clear and the air was cool. She thought about all the people out there who might be going through what she once went through. People feeling lost, alone and afraid. She wished she could tell them that sometimes life gives you the most beautiful gifts in the middle of your pain. That sometimes what feels like the end is really the beginning. She smiled softly, whispering to herself, "From pain to purpose." It wasn't just a phrase. It was her truth. Her life wasn't perfect. There were still bills to pay, worries to face, and days that felt too heavy. But through it all, she had her daughter, and that was enough. As she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, she glanced at the small crib still in the corner of the room. It was empty now, but she couldn't bring herself to move it. It reminded her of where her story began. She lay down and closed her eyes, her heart full. She thought about the long road she had walked, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the strength, the love. She had once been lost in her own pain, but now she was living with purpose, and as she drifted to sleep, she whispered the same words she had said so many times before. "We're going to be okay," because they were, because they always would be. Years passed gently, one after another, and life found its rhythm. The little girl who once fit in her mother's arms was now growing fast, curious, bright, and full of life. Every day brought something new, a new word, a new question, a new reason to smile. Their small home was filled with laughter now. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried the sounds of singing, giggles, and stories told before bedtime. Every corner of the house felt alive. Her mother often sat by the window in the evenings, watching her daughter play on the carpet with her toys. Sometimes she would stop whatever she was doing just to watch her. There was a kind of peace in those small moments, the kind of peace she once believed she'd never find. She worked hard, but she never complained. The long days and tired nights were no longer heavy burdens. They were proof that she was doing it. She was raising her daughter, building a life and standing strong. One day, while they were walking home from school, her daughter looked up at her and said, "Mom, why do you always smile at me like that?" She laughed softly, brushing her hand over her daughter's hair. "Because when I look at you, I see everything that's good in my life." Her daughter tilted her head. "Even when I'm messy and loud." "Especially then," she said with a grin. As time went on, their bond only grew stronger. They were more than mother and daughter, they were a team. They celebrated small things together, like the first lost tooth or learning to ride a bike or even just making pancakes on a lazy Sunday morning. There were still challenges. Some days were hard, with bills piling up or unexpected problems at work. There were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she'd keep everything together. But then she'd hear her daughter's quiet breathing from the next room, and her heart would calm again. She had learned that strength wasn't about never feeling afraid. It was about facing fear and moving forward anyway. Years later, when her daughter turned 8, something beautiful happened. One morning, her daughter came into her room holding a small, wrinkled piece of paper. "I made this at school," she said shyly. It was a drawing of the two of them hand in hand standing under a bright sun with the words, "My mom is my hero," written in shaky letters across the top. Her heart melted. She knelt down and hugged her daughter tightly, whispering, "You have no idea how much that means to me." Her daughter smiled, wrapping her arms around her neck. "You always make me feel safe," she said. Those words stayed with her for days. They reminded her of the promise she had made years ago, to give her daughter a life full of love and safety, even when she had to fight through her own pain to do it. That evening, she sat by the window again, her daughter asleep in her room, the stars glowing softly outside. She thought about how far she had come. The woman who once felt broken now felt whole. The fear that used to control her had turned into wisdom. She realized that healing didn't come all at once. It came slowly, quietly, through moments of love, forgiveness, and grace. Her daughter began to grow more curious about the past. One night as they were reading before bed, she asked softly, "Mom, Was it hard when I was born? The question caught her off guard. She paused for a moment, looking at her daughter's innocent face. Yes, she said gently. It was hard. But it was also the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me. Why? Her daughter asked. She smiled. Because you gave me a reason to live again. Her daughter frowned slightly. Didn't you have one before me? She took a deep breath. I thought I didn't, but then you came. And you showed me that life can be beautiful even after pain. Her daughter didn't fully understand, but she nodded, smiling softly before snuggling into her blanket. I'm glad I came, she said sleepily. Her mother smiled through tears. Me too, she whispered. As her daughter drifted to sleep, she sat there quietly, her heart full. That simple conversation reminded her how much one life can change another. Over the years, she continued to grow, not just as a mother, but as a person. She began writing again, something she had stopped doing long ago. The same notebook she used to write letters to her unborn baby now became a place for stories of strength and hope. She started sharing those stories online, never using her real name but always writing from the heart. People from around the world began reading her words. Messages poured in, people thanking her for giving them courage to keep going. It amazed her how something born out of pain could touch so many lives. She had once felt invisible, but now her words were helping others feel seen. One day she received an invitation to speak at a small community event for single mothers. She hesitated at first, nervous about sharing her story out loud, but then she thought about her daughter, the reason behind everything, and said yes. When the day came, she stood on the small stage, holding the microphone with trembling hands. The audience was full of women who had their own struggles, their own fears. She looked at them and saw pieces of herself in every face. She took a deep breath and began. I used to think my story was over, she said softly, but then I realized it was just beginning. Life has a way of breaking us, yes, but it also has a way of rebuilding us into something stronger. She talked about the night she almost gave up, about the day she heard her baby cry for the first time, about the long road from pain to peace. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment before applause filled the air. Women came up to her afterward, hugging her, thanking her for giving them hope. She left that night with tears in her eyes and a heart that felt light. She realized that this was her purpose, to turn her pain into something that could heal others. When she got home, her daughter was waiting, half asleep on the couch. How did it go, Mom? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Her mother smiled, kneeling beside her. It was wonderful, she said softly. I think I finally found what I'm meant to do. Her daughter smiled sleepily. I'm proud of you. Those words were all she needed. Years later, when her daughter grew older, she would sometimes read her mother's old writings. She would see the strength that had carried them both through and understand the depth of her mother's love. And as for her mother, she continued to live with quiet gratitude. She no longer saw her past as something to be ashamed of. It was her foundation, her proof that even the darkest moments can lead to light. Sometimes, when she spoke at events, she would end her talk with the same words every time. If you're standing in your pain right now, please don't give up. Because maybe, just maybe, that pain is leading you to your purpose, and she meant it, because she had lived it. On her daughter's 12th birthday, they visited the park where she used to walk when she was pregnant. It looked the same, the trees, the old bench, the quiet path, but to her, it felt different now. She sat down, watching her daughter run through the grass, her laughter echoing in the air. She smiled, whispering to herself, You saved me, little one, and now you're helping me save others. The sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the park. She took a deep breath, feeling the warmth on her skin. The woman who once walked this same path filled with tears now sat here filled with peace. Her story had come full circle, not a story of pain anymore, but one of strength, love, and redemption. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft breeze brush against her face. Everything she had once prayed for was right here. And as her daughter ran back and threw her arms around her neck, she knew that her life, every tear, every struggle, had led her exactly where she was meant to be. From pain to purpose, from brokenness to beauty, from despair to love. And this time, she wasn't just surviving, she was truly living.